Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. We have a global audience here and a panel of speakers here today from around the world, which is really exciting. We're happy to be here today to discuss the concept of future-ready leaders, teams, and organizations. While the term future-ready may initially suggest a clear vision of what the future holds or a definitive state, the reality is that future-ready organizations and leaders are those who excel in navigating uncertainty. In today's world, we face an abundance of uncertainty driven by the rapid pace of technological advancement and economic and geopolitical volatility. Our goal today is to explore how leaders and organizations can effectively respond to these challenges and thrive amidst the unknown. So we have assembled a really powerhouse lineup from MIT and IMD here with us today, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists to you. Elaine, if you can move to the next slide. It's my pleasure to introduce Kate Isaacs. Kate is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management, where she teaches courses on discovering your leadership signature and distributed leadership, cultivating nimble organizations, among other custom programs. She is a co-founder of a new MIT Sloan executive program, Businesses for Inclusive Local Thriving Lab. And she's an executive fellow at the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance, where she serves as a lead faculty and works on an extensive development program. It's also my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Warner. Stephanie is a principal research scientist at the MIT Sloan School of Management and the director of MIT CISR. That's the Center for Information Systems Research. And Stephanie has literally written the book on Future Ready, so we'll be hearing from her about that. It's also my pleasure to welcome our colleagues from IMD. Mark Greven is Professor of Management Innovation and Dean of Asia at IMD, and he draws on decades of experience in research, teaching, and consulting in China, so bringing that perspective to the conversation. Welcome, Mark. And Howard Yu. Howard is hailing from Hong Kong. He's the Lego Professor of Management and Innovation at IMD, and he leads the Center for Future Readiness, founded in 2020 with support from the Lego Brand Group. So we're going to kind of round out this conversation here with all of these wonderful faculty. So welcome to you all.
Thank you, Meg.
So I want to just jump in and start with Stephanie. Can you just tell us what it means to be future ready? Let's define that up front.
Okay. So when we at MIT CISR started looking at what it takes to really transform your organization, we thought about what is it that the great companies were doing. And it turns out that they are trying to transform on two dimensions. They're trying to become more operational efficient, where they're looking at increasing their productivity, standardizing, and reusing processes. And then at the same time, they are trying to create a great customer experience. And so a future ready company is one that is ambidextrous, that is innovating and pulling out costs at the same time. And those companies have a great customer experience. They really think about their architecture so that they're modular and agile, reusing components over and over again. They dynamically partner, and data is a strategic asset. So they're really using all of that to think and operate in an ecosystem with their partners, their customers, and their suppliers.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful to set the context. So that's what a future ready organization is. How does a company become future ready?
For me?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at becoming future ready, we think about what are the pathways to becoming future ready. Are you um, are you going to focus on industrializing first and then bringing in your customer experience, or are you going to attack customer experience first and then stop and re-platform everything together? Do you have an alternate focus of some on operational efficiency and then looking at customer experience and back again? Or do you create a whole new unit and use that unit to kind of bring the parent company along? And each of these pathways has both pros and cons, pitfalls that you have to look out for, and yet at the same time benefits. And so it's really imperative that leadership, define what future ready means for the organization and then think about which pathway will work best to get them to future ready.
Thanks. Thanks. So Mark and Howard, I've heard you talk about minimum viable bureaucracies. So if tomorrow's winners are minimum viable bureaucracies, what three structural features must we build first to qualify as truly future-ready, real-time enterprises?
Mm. So this is the big question, right? Because
Yeah.
we all dislike the negatives of bureaucracy, right? Which is complexity, slow, not adaptive, and that's challenging us in our transformations, right? So the minimum viable bureaucracy has to start with internally figuring out how we can become more modular, right? So the idea, and here, the most crazy example that is out there is a company that built and it's basically busted the bureaucracy into 4,000 mini enterprises, is higher. By the way, also applied to a large extent in General Electric appliances in the US, is really for the purpose of having enough scale while maintaining efficiencies and speed. And this is the one really important component, the modularity of the design of the organization, which is typically forgotten, right? We like to think about all the cool technologies. We think about, the strategies we can design. But sometimes we forget that one of the biggest obstacles is actually the way that we've been organizing ourselves for many, many decades. And I think the minimum viable bureaucracy is really fighting complexity. So that is one component, one structural feature of that modular organization. But Howard and I also have been looking at cases in different industries and find out that there is a precondition for that. Howard, what is that precondition for a modular organization actually to work? Because we don't want chaos, right? We don't want it to end up like some massive mess.
That's right. And as we are looking at companies, whether it's in China, Asia, all the way to the Western world, there are defining characters. Whether you're a manufacturer like Haier, making air conditioner, or MasterCard in the world of global finance. And that condition is what Mark and I call modularity. You have to break up a complex organization into mini, smaller chunk of interchangeable, almost like Lego bricks, and then you reassemble them. And this is where we see the actual playbook plays out for MasterCard and Visa so that they could collaborate with a little fintech startup in Singapore at the time called Grab, or a little startup called Revolut in London at the time before they grow really big. Because the internal structure is so modular, so much like Lego bricks, they're able to mix and match with minimum development costs and reuse again and again. So modularity is a key feature here.
So modularity and probably breaking down silos, correct?
That's right, because what happens is once you have modularity, it allows you to have standard interface between departments. Think about it. If everything is building up almost like lockstep, my God, the messages coming across from different functions, whether it's marketing to R&D, it becomes a little bit like telephone game, like telegraph, very slow, very clunky. One small thing gone wrong, the whole chain breaks down. But with modularity, basically you shortened the communication pathway. Innovation can go on parallel. This is how we see organization, MasterCard, Visa card, or local bank like DBS really thrive thanks to modularity.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Mark. So we've talked about where we're headed, where future-ready organizations are headed, and how they're structured, and as well as the pathways. So one thing we haven't spoken about yet is the people in our organization. So I'd love to go to Kate and ask, what are the top few capacities that teams and organizations need to be future ready? Kate, you're on mute.
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
So there are several that make this kind of modular organization work that Howard and Mark have spoken about. And we say in nimble distributed organizations, teams are the building blocks. They are the modules. They're where the work gets done. So the teams need to have some specific capacities in order for this kind of organization to function well. And there also needs to be glue that connects all the teams and the modules across the organization. So let me address the capabilities that the teams themselves need to have first. And then I'll just say a few words about that connective tissue that needs to connect everything. So first of all, teams have to be both inwardly focused on a lot of the things that we think of makes for good teams: good trust, having clear goals, good communication, all of those things. But those capacities are no longer enough. Teams also have to be externally oriented. They have to have a habit of external sense making outside of the team to understand, where do they fit in this organization? How are they contributing as a team to the wider organization's mission and purpose? And you have to be able as a team to see how your purpose and your contribution ladders up to the entire organization, as well as how do you connect in with the work of other teams so you can align your contribution as a team with the rhythms of other teams and the rest of the organization. Many teams fall into the trap naturally of being very focused on their own internal dynamics, which we need to do, but it's no longer enough. So outward into the organization, and every single team also needs to be customer focused, whether that's an internal customer or an external customer. Ultimately, the focus on how are we as an organization contributing to customer value, that's the North Star that everybody is going to orient around. So if you as a team can see how your contribution ultimately connects to that ultimate customer, whether it's a patient, if you're serving if you're a medical organization, or a paying customer of some kind, that is going to be your North Star, is that customer focus. So in addition, teams that really work well must have a growth and learning mindset. This is a superpower that will give you a competitive advantage over everybody else we're all trying to keep up with this fast changing world. So if you as a team have the safety, the norms to be able to go, okay, we tried something, it didn't work, let's learn from that. We at MIT say you either win or you learn. So can you always be learning something, even from your failures? If you can do that, you will constantly be able to stay ahead of people who are operating from fear and reaction, and you will gain that competitive edge over time. So let me just say one thing then about the connective tissue across teams and organizations, because we have in our research with Deborah Ancona and Elaine Backman on distributed leadership organizations, we've identified 3 types of leaders. And one of them is underappreciated, I would say, to make this modular system work. So you have entrepreneurial leaders. That's where the real work happens, in those entrepreneurial teams. Then you have also architecting leaders who are designing the game board of how all those modules are structured that Howard and Mark were talking about. There is an underappreciated leadership role which we call enabling leaders. And what they do is they coach the entrepreneurial teams, they connect them, they communicate up and down the organization what those teams are doing, and help senior leaders understand where the innovation is coming from. And they help also remove obstacles to innovation at the team level. So they're helping, whether you're in an agile system and you're, these roles are called different things, whether you're a coach or what have you, all good distributed leadership systems have these enabling leaders who help make the whole system function. They're super connectors, and they're underappreciated, but they're absolutely essential for these systems to work.
Thanks, Kate. It's really interesting when you're here at MIT that you would think that we focus solely on technology, yet we believe that technology alone is not enough. It's not a silver bullet. And most important are those distinctly human skills. So that's what Kate has just been sharing with us. And that is something that is always part of the conversation at MIT. And kind of shifting a little and talking about, AI and advances in AI, Howard and Mark, I'm wondering which day-to-day practices really do you see that distinguish firms that are learning faster, right? That have this growth mindset, that are learning continuously. What are the day-to-day practices of those firms?
Yeah, Meg, this is such a great question because what we have seen is modularity you think about as foundation. Then you lay on top of Gen AI or agentic AI, magic really happen. Give you a really concrete example. We've been working with Booking Holdings, Booking.com, Kayak, that company. And what they have been telling us, essentially one major practice is experimentation at extreme scale facilitated by AI. So we talk about A/B test ever since the digital transformation. But what Booking.com people told me, they basically use Gen AI to run A/B test. And I was like, oh my God, where's the human loop? Well, the human only makes sure these A/B tests are meaningful. They would also allocate resources, financial resources, when there are outlying, pattern coming up so that they do spot check and exception management. To me, that is such a profound understanding. Because in order to win today, it's not enough to do a lot of experimentation, but one of the daily habit is putting that AI layer on top of everything you do. And notice that you're not taking the human out, but you are accelerating the scale and speed at extreme level. So that's number one, I would say.
Mm. Yeah. Maybe I can pick up another one example from a different part of the world here, which is DBS, the bank in Singapore, which is arguably, or according to many rankings, the best bank in the world and the best digital bank in the world. And they are really good at experimentation. And one of the reasons, if you open up this machine, why they're good at that, is because they spent quite a long time. I'm going to say maybe 4 or 5 years in cleaning up the kitchen. So cleaning up the kitchen as internally standardizing their processes, getting really clear about how teams should work together. And only once they got ready, really start to leverage that capability to become more agile, more modular, and faster in their experimentation. And one proof point is really interesting. Today, an AI deployment takes DBS around 5 weeks. This used to take a year and a half. So today they do this in just 5 weeks. And then you look at it, why is that possible? And then we find out that over 90% of the DBS employees, so that's like basically everyone, has gone through AI literacy programs. So it's not just the technologists or the IT folks, it's the whole organization that has built that muscle. And then obviously went in this very clean kitchen to experiment fast. So that's another example, I think, where you see how that where this can really work well, but only, as Howard mentioned earlier, if we are willing to do some of the slower work. Slow to get fast.
That's right.
I love that. So, we're talking about experimentation and having a growth mindset, different ways of working. And I know that, Stephanie, you have 4 explosions on your pathways to future ready. And one of them is, in fact, new ways of working. Can you tell us a bit about the explosions and, how they play into the future ready journey?
Sure. When we talk about all of these pathways, one of the things we want to, put front and center is that uh, becoming future ready is a major organizational change. And we use the term explosions just to really emphasize how kind of altering this organizational change is to your employees, your partners, your suppliers. And so we've identified 4 different kinds of explosions that companies need to manage as they transform themselves. And the first one is around um, getting the right people to lead key decisions. And this is will play into what Kate is talking about, which is, are you allocating your decision rights correctly? Do you have the right people? Do you need to get different kind of talent in? And we think of at least in every transformation that we've looked at, 2 major decisions that you need to be thoughtful about in allocating those decision rights. The first one is on who's going to be in charge of what, the strategy, and then who's going to be in charge of the how, which is much more operational. And then the second is what's going to be global throughout your organization and what's going to be local. And as leaders push those decision rights down into the organization, you really start to get to the second explosion, which is creating new ways of working. And those new ways of working are all about changing the habits that you have in your company. And this is how we think that you're going to get a digital culture. So it's around amplifying the customer voice in your organization. Are you using Net Promoter Score? Maybe it's design thinking or sentiment analysis. How do you bring in what the customer thinks about your products and services and as you're addressing those needs? Another one is around agile ways of work, and Kate just talked about teams. This is around a team-based way of especially product and other kinds of development and software development, where you're taking an iterative approach, a test and learn approach. So it's not that you've got a command and control type of leadership style, but it's more of a coach and communicate. Future ready companies and creating a digital culture also relies on using data for your decision making. And so data becomes more and more important. And that data is not just as important for the decision making, but also it's going to become the foundation for how you're going to use AI. The third explosion is around developing a platform mindset. This is around silo busting. What are the platforms that you need across the organization, platforms of data processes and technology that you're going to reuse over and over again? How are you putting the APIs in so that you can share data and that you can communicate with the outside world? Getting rid of the spaghetti, as we call it. And then the last explosion is around removing organizational complexity, and that's doing organizational surgery. And when we talk to a lot of companies as they start a digital transformation, a lot of them want to begin with a reorganization, do that organizational surgery. But we find, and we have seen in all of our transformations, that you run the risk of solidifying an organizational structure too early if you reorganize too early. And so we really recommend get those decision rights correctly. Figure out, what's the North Star, figure out the vision, what's going to be global, what's going to be local, and get those right people in to lead the key decisions.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's quite a bit, and it's understandable that you call those 4 explosions, right? Because those are something that you would really feel in your organization, and will take a probably a different type of leadership. So I'd like to jump over to Kate and just ask kind of what's the biggest thing that individual leaders need to do personally to lead in the future ready way?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And there are so many things. I would say 2 are really important that you can't do without. So, first of all, we oftentimes see things in either or terms. We're going to focus on people or we're going to focus on performance, margin or mission, centralized or decentralized, autonomy or alignment. And we get often stuck in aligning with one of these extremes. And people do this all the time. It's just natural because the world is complicated. It's very hard to hold both things and figure out how to create solutions that get the best of both. So how do you provide maximum autonomy in a modular way? And Stephanie identified one just now. How do you do local empowerment, but also keep an eye on the global situation and make sure everyone is aligned around common solutions? So one thing that can help with that is this customer focus we've been talking about. If everybody is focused on how can we create customer value, as Stephanie was just talking about, then we can then open up the box to think about how do we release people's creativity and give them some autonomy to be creative and get them aligned. Well, they're aligned because they're aligned around customer value creation. That's what Satya Nadella did at Microsoft. That was one of his 3 imperatives, was to be customer obsessed. So a lot of organizations are focusing on this customer obsession, and that can help us free people up, but align them around something that the organization cares about. So that dual both and thinking is a really key leadership skill that we see folks who are future ready being able to exhibit. And we will teach practices around that in our course so that you can build your muscle around that. The second thing is, I would say is really essential, is leading with calm courage. So this is a time of profound anxiety and uncertainty. And we've spent some time talking about that, that people all over the world are feeling that. So when leaders can present themselves with a space of calmness, and calm radiates and spreads just like panic radiates and spreads out. So if you can show up, regulate your own emotions, and that means achieving balance in your own life. We can't run around and burn ourselves out and then expect to provide a sense of calm and give people the courage to act in spite of uncertainty if we ourselves are burned out and drained. So that means, for instance, some executives I know get up early in the morning and they spend the first hour of the day gardening or journaling or doing something that's pleasurable, so that they're filling their own cups, and then they're able to provide a sense of calm and regulated leadership to their people. And that spreads, just like if you come in and you're crazy and burned out, that also spreads. So what kind of modeling are you doing for the people that you're leading so that they can also sustain hope and resilience in these uncertain times? That starts with you as a leader, doing that in your own life and modeling that for others.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks. It's, I love this term of calm courage, and also kind of going back to what Mark said earlier about slowing down, right? Slowing down to think about how you can accelerate. And that really comes from the leadership and the teams. And so, I think that's a theme we're seeing here. I did notice a question here in the Q&A about building strong and united teams. When we modulize the big group into a Lego piece, how can we build humanity in the team environment while in these modules? Any insights on that?
So go ahead.
Stephanie, go.
Oh, go ahead, Howard.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll pass back to you. One short answer that Mark and I have come across is, if you want to modularize the organization, one thing is, first you need to understand the pattern of information exchange. What is being passed on across department? Because if everything is very complicated, if you don't go through the standardization processes, then you would modularize the wrong thing. So what we tended to mention is, before you going into, trying to modularize, automate stuff, first is to take a step back. 80-20 rules. There 80% of the communication are very routine, very repetitive. Then you standardize them so that you don't need to rely on email. Maybe it's a shared document online, so people do information pool. That in itself is simplification. So then you standardize those interface. That allows you to begin to think about, so we are not always need to lockstep on everything. We could in fact modularize our task so that it becomes much more of like a Lego bricks. So don't shoot for boiling the ocean from day one. Start with understanding 80-20 rules. What are the communication information exchange? You could standardize and simplify first. Take that first step before you go for the bigger bite of the pie.
And what I was also going to say is look to see what's your crown jewels. What is your organization best at? And that's another place where you can standardize and modularize, because this will become the focus and the base of your innovation in your organization. And also, I was going to argue that humanity is kind of built in to the agile ways of work. What you're really doing in this kind of new environment is really empowering your people to make decisions, and you're pushing that decision making down lower into the organization. Now, you have to also allocate those decision rights so that people lower down have the authority to really make those decisions and to act. But you could not do, say, this agile ways of work, this test and learn, without taking into account the people. People are going to be very important. Now, as Howard said, when you modularize, when you're looking at what is standard, repetitive, and that you can automate, what you're then going to do is take, I mean, we talk about that as being an empowered decision maker, that you're actually taking the things that are the most important to your organization because they're going to be the hardest to automate, and really people are going to still be dealing with that.
Thanks,
Actually-
Stephanie. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was listening to Howard and Stephanie, right? And I think what is really interesting here is, right, there's this really counterintuitive fact that we standardize, we modularize. It seems that we're being very mechanical about the organization, which seems to feel to take away all the human element. But in our research, and we're looking, for instance, as a company like Hire or companies like MasterCard or DBS, we see that in fact by doing that, we empower people to be more free, to be more autonomous, and to be more human. So there's a way where technology, by leveraging it in the right way, by standardizing, by simplifying, by building modular capabilities, actually most employees get better access to more democratically using the capabilities that are available in the organization. So there's this counterintuitive fact that by more standardization and modularization, we actually get more autonomy and more empowerment. And I think for me, that's a really important takeaway, because otherwise we'll always be fighting between, but that's the centralization effort, and we don't like centralization. But actually that centralization, done in the right way, will actually free up and unleash the human potential in the organization much better than in a very complex, bureaucratic, tightly knit organization. So I think that's a really important takeaway as well when I'm listening to Stephanie and Howard in this context.
And when you're thinking about that modularization, you're really thinking about what are the things that you do over and over again and creating them so that you use it in the same way. One of my examples is, in a bank, a lot of times a bank that is really in silos and spaghetti, that has lots, say a silo for every product, is going to have a different way of onboarding a customer for every single one of those products. And the question to ask as an organization is, do you need that kind of complexity? Maybe you do, but you should not just say, well, this is the way that we've always done it. I mean, think about the benefits that are gained when you create those modules. You're going to have more standardized data, and that's going to be so important in this land, in this world of when
That's right.
AI and this data becoming a really strategic asset. So you want to think clearly about those modules, but I like what Mark is saying about those modules in your organization, then allow your people to improvise. Because if you've trained your people, they're upskilled, they know what that North Star is, they can improvise as they innovate.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie. There is something in the chat here, a question about bringing the best outcomes with AI and digital transformation to become future ready. Did you want to say a little bit about the AI maturity model?
I did put a link to that in the
Okay.
chat,
Okay.
but one of the things that we've started doing research on is what is the role of AI in organizations? Just because my life at MIT Scissor kind of exploded when generative AI came out. And so we started looking at firms as to how they were thinking and how they were using AI. And we actually looked more broadly than just generative AI. And what we saw were 4 different stages. One was companies were looking at the landscape and saying, okay, we need to educate our people. We need to put into place governance around AI, and we need to start, providing some of the tools. Then in the second stage, it's around building pilots and experimenting. And this is around using out of the box kind of models. It's around using, and we call kind of the difference between the tools versus solutions. And a lot of times in that second stage, it's around making sure that people feel comfortable with the tools, but then start thinking about how can AI start to change the organization. And at that stage, kind of the stage between stage 2 and stage 3 is where you have to start to commit. You have to start figuring out, well, how is AI going to become a core competency? How do we begin to embed this into and create AI ways of working? And in fact, when you look at the firm performance, the impact comes from moving from experiments to really embedding it. And in this third stage, you're also starting to create solutions, create organization-specific solutions. The fourth stage, where there aren't many companies at all, would be an AI organization where you've got AI processes, you've got AI built into all the processes, you're starting to create AI enabled services. And so that's how we think about AI, really moving from educating, setting up guidelines, guidance, and governance, experimenting, and then moving to embedding, and then really, creating the AI ways of working.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks for sharing the link as well. We have another question here asking, in a very large organization that's undergoing restructuring, how can one effectively embody the ambidexterity that's needed, particularly when communication is unclear and processes are kind of in flux? What are the best strategies to balance exploration and exploitation in such a context?
I can pick up on that. So the short answer is, of course, we have to do both, as Rhonda acknowledged. We have to be ambidextrous. And there's going to need to be protection and permission for people who are operating in edge spaces that are exploring new technologies and creating new products and services that are going out beyond the incremental innovation that the current organization is based on, and what their value creation and value proposition is based on. So this is why companies create skunk works, they locate teams off-site, they have innovation contests with a protected space where people can create new ideas, and then give them some funding and dynamic resourcing so that good ideas can start to take root. And the senior leaders of an organization must encourage and protect and give permission for innovation at these edge spaces, because some of them will threaten the core business or core ways of doing things of the existing organization. And then you get attention. So these are like new little seedlings that are trying to take root. And if you don't give them a chance by protecting them in some way and giving them, watering them with enough resources, attention, mentoring from leaders and other peers in the organization, they may just get stomped out by the existing dominant culture and ways of doing things. So protection, permission, and encouragement for these new ways of working while the organization is still, paying the bills and serving its customers with its existing offering.
Mhm. Well, I really like this train of thought, Kate. And part of me is like trying to go back to what's the original job as a leader, right? Before we think about ambidextrous leading, right? And I think it's always about you need to lead the business, you need to lead people, and you need to lead yourself. And how you show up as an ambidextrous leader is obviously going to be a function of the know-how that you have. Have you experienced this? Have you practiced this? Have you been trained in being a little bit more ambidextrous, being able to flex the muscles between perform and transform, explore and exploit? That's a bit of a know-how thing, right? There's experience in that. That's also related to motivation, right? Do you have the motivation to actually show up as an ambidextrous, a very flexible leader when you need, right? And that's something that is not always a given. And I like one of my colleagues at IMD always says, microeconomics can be summarized in 4 words: people respond to incentives. And I think that's also the case when we think about leading. And if we want people to behave like ambidextrous leaders and show up as ambidextrous leaders, we need to think about that. But the most important, I think, is you need to learn, and we all need to learn the capability to judge situations. I think situational judgment is an underappreciated skill in many organizations because we may know how to do A, we may know how to do B, but do we know how and when we need to behave like A or B? So situational judgment, I think, is a thing that in the work that we see, it becomes a really important skill to be able to flex the muscle as an ambidextrous leader.
And just to
And-
build on what Mark you just mentioned, right? That skill reside at the team level as well. This is where in our future readiness indicator, all the top firm, they really make sure the management team have a diverse point of view. They come with different schools of experience. Because in the auto industry, if everyone are mechanical engineers, it's really hard to stay on top of competition these days. So that diverse school of experience, that ambidextrous talent at the team mix is also a key indicator as well.
And I think underscoring all of that, really curiosity, right? Kind of leaders and teams being curious, asking great questions and listening carefully, right? To one another, to the customers, to what's going on in the market. So we're getting to close to the top of the hour here. I'm wondering if each of you would like to share one or two key takeaways you'd offer to our listeners here today as they're thinking about where they are and where they're going on their future ready journey.
I can start.
Yeah.
So, one of the most important things that we found in transformations is creating a common language. So you want to create a common language around what's the vision, where are we going, and what does it mean to be a future ready company. So what we're hoping with the frameworks that we've given you here today is a way to think and to communicate with your colleagues so that you're all on the same page and moving in the same direction. And then number two is you need to commit. You can't, our research shows that companies that change their pathways, that are on multiple pathways that are not coordinated, and everybody is doing their own thing, is they're really suffering in terms of completing or moving along in their transformation. So you need to create that common language, create where you're going, and then commit to a pathway or pathways with the mechanisms to coordinate if you have multiple pathways. And then think about the platforms that you need to build. What we're seeing in organizations, and this goes back to that modularity, is reuse is very important. It it contributes to efficiency. It allows you to have it helps with getting better data. It is the base for that new kind of innovation, that improvisational innovation. And so platforms, you need to be thinking about what you're really great at, what can be standardized, and then build that into a platform. And then finally, remember that these kinds of transformations, they underpin what you're going to be doing in the future. They're underpinning how you're going to use AI. They're underpinning, um, you know, are you going to move and lead an ecosystem? So think carefully about what you're doing with your transformation.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks so much for bringing up that common language. We do company-specific or custom programs, and we have really seen again and again that this common language is so valuable and important to a transformation and change. And not just coming up with a common language or adopting it, but using it day to day. And we've seen it done really well in companies where leaders have stories about their learning that got them to the decisions that they made and what was hard for them to change. And if they use that common language and demonstrate that, it will cascade through the organizations and make it easier for people to make the change and adopt the new ways of working and such. So that's something we've definitely seen. Thanks, Stephanie.
I'd like to pick up on what Stephanie said in terms of just double clicking, underscoring the importance of communicating the vision. Where are we going? And there's a funny saying about the half-life of the communication of that vision is the midpoint of your plane ride home. And so by the time you've communicated your vision and you're halfway home, the people you've communicated it to have forgotten it. And so you have to repeat that over and over and over again at every opportunity so that people understand this is what this organization is about, this is where we're going, and you can't say it too many times, so that it's got to become sticky in people's minds. And that's how you create that alignment with the minimum viable bureaucracy, is just constant communication of a stable vision. Secondly, I would say that we haven't talked much in this call about trust. And I would advocate that with all of these new technologies, AI is the latest wave of the disruptive technology. We had calculators, we had personal computers, we had the internet, now we have AI. We're always going to be in disruptive technology moments. We need to be able to move at the speed of trust as we're embracing these technologies, because trust with our employees who are wondering if these technologies are going to put me out of a job or how I'm going to get trained up to use them to become better at my job, with our customers who are wondering if their privacy is going to be protected when these powerful new tools get put in place. We have to move at that speed of trust, so that because trust takes a long time to build and sustain and just a moment to lose. So that is really important. And that trust building is then grounded in values, our personal values as leaders and our organization's values. And somebody asked a question in the chat about growth mindset. Well, the fastest way to help an organization embrace a growth mindset is socialize the idea, but then model it, because people are looking to leaders to, what do you do when you're under pressure? Are you going to become defensive, or are you going to model that growth mindset, admit you were wrong, say you'll do better, learn something, and then people will learn that from you. And then the organization's values are key, and great organizations, for instance, the Ritz-Carlton or Triodos Bank in the Netherlands does a great job of having the organization collectively explore values dilemmas. And so here's a dilemma. How do our values help us make a decision in the middle of this dilemma? And that's really helpful in navigating in this uncertain time, because your values are your North Star, just as your vision is.
Thanks, Kate.
And for us, I guess between Mark and I, we would add just one more is, you know, Successful organization and stay future ready despite all this uncertainty is they perform and transform at the same time. Is this duality that we saw in our ranking across 7 different industries, 500 different companies. They really do that. The outlier, they all share the commonality. They invest aggressively in the future. Meanwhile, they're making sure they're passionate about their core business so that they are doing something the market would reward, doing something they truly love and passionate about, and do something they're truly great at. And it's this intersection between the 3, I think, that gives them a sense of calm, like Kate said. At the organization, they find their purpose. So they're willing to slow down doing the slow work, like MasterCard, like DBS, like many outstanding organizations, in order to move fast, seemingly overnight. So taking a long view, this is what I said.
And I think, Howard, I think one of the things that we've also learned is the changing of perspectives by taking an outside-in perspective, right? So I often hear, hey, what are the best practices? What should we be doing? And then the first tip is always, look outside, look at other industries, please. Do not look at the same industry, look at other industries. And I think the real case in point, and picking up on one of the questions in the chat, was around BYD, right? Which is now, the #1 EV maker in the world. This company is not a car company. It's a battery company that now is making cars. And they took such an outside-in perspective to look at what's the business model that work for the EV world. What's the business model that we need to build? What capabilities do we need to focus on? And BYD has been relentless in focusing on 1 or 2 priorities for the last 20 years. And I think that gave them that advantage that by today, BYD no longer means bring your dollars, but it means build your dreams. And I think that's a lesson we can all take from companies like that.
Thank you, Mark. So I just want to say thanks to Stephanie, Kate, Mark, and Howard for joining us today. We're so excited about this collaboration between MIT and IMD, bringing together great thinkers from both institutions and perspectives from a variety of geographies. If you'd like to learn more about this 2-week academy that we've partnered up to create, our Future Ready Enterprise, there's a QR code there that you can scan, and you can certainly reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks so much to everyone who joined us here today. Thanks for your great questions. Wishing you all well and hope to see you sometime soon. Thank you.